I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical. We're here today with another installment of our Mega Arms MATEN build. Now today we are going to install the barrel and gas system on our Mega Arms monolithic upper receiver. Now the Mega Arms monolithic upper receiver has been discontinued, but you can still find these floating around online. If you can pick one up online, either secondhand or new in the box, make sure that it includes the Mega Arms barrel nut wrench. This is a very hefty tool, but it is definitely required to install the barrel nut in the monolithic upper. If you don't get one of these barrel nut wrenches, it's going to be very, very difficult to complete this build. So keep that in mind. Mega Arms has replaced the monolithic MATEN upper with their new MKM upper receiver that uses a key mod type forend, and hopefully we'll be able to review one of those soon for you after we get this project done, so stay tuned for that. Now let's run over the components that we're going to need real quick to install the barrel and the gas system on our upper receiver. First thing, of course, you need the upper receiver, the barrel nut wrench, the barrel nut, and this is specific to the Mega Arms MATEN monolithic, so make sure you have the right barrel nut. It's included in the kit with the upper receiver if you purchase it as a whole. We need a barrel, which in this case we're using a Rainier Arms Select 16-inch barrel. This barrel uses a DPMS mid-length gas system, so we need a DPMS mid-length gas tube. We need some type of gas block, and in this case we're using the SLR Rifle Works DA7 adjustable gas block. Now this gas block has two set screws to hold it onto the barrel, and it has one set screw in the front that you can adjust to allow more or less gas into the system. This will allow you to adjust how the rifle recoils and how it feeds and operates. This is very nice if you're going to either use a suppressor on the system, or if you want to tune the rifle to recoil as lightly as possible with a specific load. You don't want a whole lot of extra gas slamming that bolt carrier around if you really don't need it. So this should allow us to really dial this rifle system in, and we'll see how it works once we get it on. One of the nice things about this adjustable gas block is there are no set screws that you have to mess with. It just has the one set screw in the front that has a spring detent on it. So as you turn it, you'll feel it click into each setting. This is nice because there's nothing to work loose. You don't have to worry about messing with it later. Now we'll have to wait and see how it works once we get it carboned up and get some gas flowing through it. See if we have any problems with it adjusting or losing adjustment later on. Now when you use a gas block that has set screws on the bottom, one thing that you do want to make sure is you want to make sure that you have at least one corresponding dimple on the bottom of your barrel. Now the Rainier Arms Select Barrel already came dimpled for a gas block. This is nice because once you get that set screw screwed in there and then Loctited in place, a hit on the gas block is not going to cause it to rotate and bring the gas holes out of alignment. This isn't really a concern with our Mega Arms rifle length upper, because if you notice when the barrel is installed, the gas block will be underneath the handguard or underneath the rail system. So it will be protected. There's no way for you to hit it and rotate it once everything's assembled. This was actually something we were thinking about when we were deciding the length of the barrel, the gas system, and the upper all in one shot. So with either a carbine or a mid-length gas system, the rail system is going to protect your block. If you go with a rifle length gas system, then the gas block will be outside of the front of the tube, and it is something you have to keep in mind that you want that protected, or you want to go with a barrel where the gas block is cross-pinned in so it doesn't rotate. Tools that we're going to need to assemble this, besides the actual barrel wrench itself, you always want to have a hammer handy, and this is a rubber mallet, so if we got to whack on something, then we're not going to worry about marring it or dinging it up. Need a caliper. The caliper is going to help us measure and make sure that our gas holes are lined up when we go to put this together. A foot-pound torque wrench. So this will attach onto the barrel nut wrench and allow us to dial in our correct torque when we're installing the barrel. We need some grease, And any kind of moly-based grease will work. Just go down to your auto parts store. You can pick up one of these big old tubs for a couple of bucks. This is Coastal Moly EP grease. Works just fine. A tub like this will last you for a long time when you're assembling uppers. And Loctite. I like the blue temporary Loctite. I don't really want to put stuff together with red Loctite because then you have to break out the torch when you want to take it apart. Most of what we're going to use the Loctite for are fasteners. It's not really going to be high temp locations. There's one exception to that, and we'll talk about that as we go along. Now, one of the most important parts of the build, or one of the most important tools that we need for the build, is some way to hold the upper receiver fixed in the vise while we install the barrel. Now, we really don't want to just clamp on to the upper receiver in the vise because we run the risk of crushing parts of the upper receiver or marring it up with the vise jaws. After all, this is billet aluminum. It's very high quality, very high strength aluminum, but it is aluminum, and we use a very large bench vise. We go cranking down on that thing. It's really easy to crush stuff. So we want to use the proper tooling to hold this in place. What Mega Arms recommends is the DPMS Panther Claw block. Now, this is a machined plastic block, and it's got this little flipper here that sticks up. And what that does is it inserts in to the upper receiver and it supports it all the way through to the top channel where your charging handle goes through. So it gives you a whole lot of support. It has two takedown pins here that engage through the takedown pin lugs in the bottom of your upper receiver, so it holds it together very well. It gives you plenty of room to work on the receiver, and it doesn't really block anything, but it gives the vise a place to clamp down here that you can really crank down on it and get some good holding power and not worry about damaging anything. You're not going to crush this block in your vise unless you really go crazy and throw a cheater bar on it. Another block that we had from a previous project that we purchased through Bushmaster is this clamshell type block right here. Now, if you have one of these laying around, this is left over from our AR-10 build. This will actually fit kinda around the outside of the MATEN. Do not be tempted to use this block because if you look closely, once we have this clamped on, it's not really closed. There's a little space right here. So if I go ahead and drop this block down in the vise and get those vise jaws on there and really clamp down on them, I'm going to exert a whole lot of pressure on the sides of the receiver. Now, I don't know how much pressure it would take to actually crush this upper receiver, but I'm almost sure with the size of the bench vise I use here that I could exert enough pressure to deform this receiver. That's not a chance that we want to take. So if you have one of these blocks laying around or a friend offers to loan you one, do not use it for this application. It works great for the AR-10. It'll also work on some of the DPMS upper receivers, but it is not for the Mega Arms monolithic upper receiver or any of their billet MATEN receivers. Go ahead and use the DPMS Panther Claw and you'll be good to go. Now, there are two different types of DPMS Panther Claw blocks. There's one specifically for the 308 ARs, and then there's a smaller one for the AR-15s. I have the smaller AR-15 block. I use it for assembling AR-15s. It will not fit for this application. The pins don't go in the right place, and the block on the top here is not correctly sized to work with that application. So the right tool for the right job, this is the right tool for what we're doing. Lastly, we're going to put a decent brake on this system because we want to be able to have quick follow-up shots. We want to reduce the recoil a little bit, and we want the ability to mount a suppressor later on. So we chose the Surefire SOCOM muzzle brake. This is a very effective muzzle brake on its own, but also gives us the opportunity to mount a Surefire SOCOM suppressor later on should we wish to do so. Another added advantage of the Surefire brake is it includes everything you need to mount it. There is a shim kit included in here and a little tuber rock set to stick the brake on when we're done, and we'll show you how we go about mounting that and timing it so that the ports are correctly positioned once we get everything together. Now we've got all our parts laid out here and we're ready to start assembly, but there are a couple of final checks that we need to make sure that we do to make sure everything lines up. I've seen a lot of guys assemble ARs and just throw all the parts together, not really checking any dimensions and hoping that they'll work when you're done. As long as your rifle head spaces correctly, which we showed how to check that in the last video, then the rifle will more than likely be safe to fire, but it may not function optimally. So what we need to do right now is make sure that all our parts from the various different manufacturers line up and all the tolerances fit correctly. The primary thing that we're going to check before we start assembly is the location of the gas port on the barrel, and we're going to make sure that it lines up with the gas port inside our gas block here. If those two are misaligned even by a little bit, then you may not get the gas flow that you need to reliably operate the rifle. Since we're using an adjustable gas block, we want the maximum gas flow to begin with, and then we want to be able to close off the adjustment on the block to limit the flow later on. Now, in order to do this, my method is to take our calipers here, turn them on and make sure they're zeroed, and then I'm going to measure where the gas port is in relation to the shoulder of the block. Now I measure right to the aft edge of the port, so the side of the port that is closest to the shoulder on the barrel. Now once I have that measurement, go ahead and lock off our caliper by turning the little screw here. That keeps it from sliding and that keeps my adjustment dialed in. Now I flip the caliper over and there's a little tail that extends off the bottom here. Now what I'm going to do with that tail is I'm going to stick it inside the gas block here and see where that tail comes to rest on our gas port in here. Now I want to make sure that the edge of the tail matches up with the the rearward edge of the port on the gas block, and it comes just a little bit past it, but I can see that the port in the gas block here is much larger than the port on the barrel, which is fine because the port on the barrel is what controls how much gas comes out. If you're going to have one port larger than the other, the port on the gas block is the one that needs to be the larger of the two. Now just as a final check, I'm going to loosen this up. Now I'm going to measure from the shoulder to the forwardmost edge on our port. Again, lock it off and do the same procedure in the barrel. Now that comes just short of the forward edge of the port in the gas block. That means when we slide this on and I snug up the edge of the gas block to the edge on the barrel here, the shoulder on the barrel, then that gas port in the barrel is going to be within the range of the gas port in the block. So it'll be venting straight into there. Now one final thing that we'll do before we slide it on is we're going to make a mark on the shoulder here where the port is on the barrel, and then I'm going to make a mark on the shoulder, on the back shoulder of the gas block on where the port is in the gas block. And we slide it on, we're going to make sure that those two marks line up when we tighten the set screw down into that divot. If tightening it down, if that divot was drilled off a little bit and it torques to one side or the other, then we may have some issues and we may have to go about fixing that little divot in the bottom of the barrel. I don't think that's going to be an issue. We dry fitted this earlier and everything looked like it lined up correctly. So if for some reason that divot didn't line up, then you may need to either fill it with some material and drill a divot for the front set screw where it needs to be correctly, or you may have to just contact the barrel manufacturer and send it back and have them fix it for you or give you a correct barrel. Or as a final option, go with a clamping style gas block instead of a set screw style gas block, and that way you can clock it wherever you need and then tighten it down. That's really all we need to do to measure this. The primary thing, checking the headspace on the barrel against our bolt, we already did in the previous episode. I can't stress enough, if you don't know what I'm talking about as far as head spacing, go back and watch the previous episode. That way you know you're going to do this correctly. It's very, very important that you know what you're talking about with headspace in the barrel and checking the headspace on the bolt before we go to the next assembly process. It's a whole lot easier to send this barrel back when it has not been installed than it is after you've installed it and got adhesive and grease and stuff and scratches all over the barrel. Some manufacturers may not take the barrel back after you do that. Let's go ahead and get our block tightened up in our vise and get everything set up there, and then we'll talk you through going ahead and installing the barrel and tightening it down. Now, once we have our components laid out on our bench here, the first thing that we're going to need to do is insert the barrel into the upper receiver. Now, I'm going to do this without the barrel block and then get the barrel nut started so that we can make sure that the barrel is lined up and we can see both sides and we can see into the bottom of the receiver to make sure that the barrel is seated all the way back into position. Now, at this point, what you're going to need to do is take off your shipping cap off the back of your barrel. And this is installed at the factory to keep any grime or nastiness from working its way into your receiver extension and getting into your barrel. Just set that aside. You'll notice at the 12 o'clock position on our barrel, there's a little pin here. Now, this pin corresponds to a groove that's in the 12 o'clock position in the receiver. When we slide the barrel back into the upper receiver, it's very important to get that pin located correctly exactly at 12 o'clock and slid all the way in so that this collar here can come to rest against the mating surface inside the upper receiver. If that does not happen and you get this out of position, then you're not going to get the barrel all the way back into position. When you tighten that barrel nut down, you could cause some damage to the receiver and or the barrel, and your bolt will not go into battery when you get done. So it's very important that you get that pin lined up. Now, to help us with this, on the monolithic upper, we have a hole drilled here in the bottom of the receiver. And it's very difficult to see on camera, but it goes all the way through and it bridges the little step that's inside there. So when the barrel fits all the way back into our receiver, we'll see the rim here on the barrel extension, and we'll see it line up and come to rest against the step inside the upper receiver. That was a very nice feature. It's very thoughtful. It makes it real easy for me to see if this is seated all the way in. When we're doing a standard AR upper receiver, then it's easy to see because this collar will come to rest against the front face of the receiver, the frontmost position of the receiver. So it's easy to see outside of a standard receiver. It's a bit harder when you're running a monolithic type deal like this. Now, we've already dry fit this barrel into this upper receiver and it fits very snugly. If for some reason you go in to fit your barrel in and it fits fairly loosely, then what you would want to do is go get some wheel bearing adhesive and put that wheel bearing adhesive on the outside of the barrel extension, slide it back in there, and that will help take up some of that gap so that there's no chance of the barrel sliding around in there. That was a tip that was given to me by a match rifle builder that built high power ARs for competition. It seems to work pretty well. Now, what Mega Arms suggests is you use that moly grease that I showed you around the extension on the barrel. You can do that, and that is what I suggest if you're building a CQB type carbine or something that's just going to be a hard use rifle. That'll help prevent water from getting back in there, and you don't really care about gluing the barrel into the upper receiver. If it moves around a little bit, we're not looking for sub MOA accuracy out of a carbine. In this rifle, we are looking for the best accuracy that we can get. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some Loctite here, and we're going to cover the barrel extension with Loctite and slide it in there, and that will kind of help glue it in. Now, this is not going to be a high volume of fire rifle, meaning we're not going to heat this up until the barrel's cherry red. So I'm not really worried about putting extremely high temp adhesive in there. If I was, and I didn't ever intend to take this system apart, I might even consider doing something like epoxying the system together. That's not unheard of in the high power arena, where AR-15 upper receivers are fairly disposable. I don't know that you would want to do it with a high dollar monolithic upper setup like this. I would still rather have the barrel as the disposable part, be able to throw it out and put a new barrel in here, or facilitate caliber changes later on. If I wanted to go from a 308 to a 708 or 6.5 millimeter, then I want to still be able to do that. So we'll use some blue Loctite so we can still break it down later on. We just want to take up any microscopic clearance that we have in there. Now, once we put the barrel in, we're going to spread some grease onto our barrel nut here, and we're just going to start it in, and we're just going to get it hand tight and make sure everything lines up and we don't have any problems or any cross threading. Then we'll go ahead and put it on the barrel vise, or I'm sorry, in the action block, and put it in the vise and get it torqued down. So let's go ahead and put some Loctite on the barrel extension, and we'll get it started. You want to make sure that you do not get the Loctite in the barrel. I'm just going to go ahead and use my finger to smooth it around here. Because of the way the MATEN upper receiver goes together, I'm not really worried about getting any of that Loctite on the threads. I want to try to keep from messing things up and getting it all nasty, but it's not a huge concern. Now we went ahead and we've got it in there, but we can see the edge starting, but it's not quite where it needs to be. So I'm going to give it a little bit of side-to-side twisting, and I'm watching that edge come back. I look at where my gas port is and notice that it's at 12 o'clock, so everything's lined up there, and I'm going to give it a little bit of a tap on the bench. And it's just to make sure that we've got that seated all the way back against that little lip in there. And it's seated all the way back. Now we can look inside the upper receiver and we can see that the extension is all the way back into the receiver. You can tell just by looking at that it's all the way back. If it comes back any further, it would interfere with the port door or the charging handle. So we know we've got that seated in there now. Now we can go ahead and grab our barrel nut and put a little bit of moly grease on it. And just need a little bit of a dab on there, and as we turn it in, that grease will work itself around. And I'll put just a little bit on the surface that's going to bear against the collar. Now the nice thing about the MATEN wrench is it kind of holds the barrel nut like that. So when we slide it down over the barrel, it'll hold it in place. We're going to go ahead and start it over here. And just slide it in. And you can see it go down as we go through there. And then we're just going to go ahead and screw it in hand tight here. And that's hand tight. Now we're going to go ahead and inspect it, make sure everything lines up. Get a little bit of grease in there, but we'll take care of that later on. We're trying to keep things a little bit clean as we're putting this together. And again, we can look down through the observation hole here and make sure that our barrel is lined up against that step and that we have our barrel nut in there, and there's really no wiggle right now with it hand tight. Now we're going to go ahead and take our action block and drop it into our vise here and tighten it down. And you want to get it fairly tight in there because once we get the upper receiver in, we're going to have some leverage going. Now grab your pins here and just pull them back far enough that the lugs will clear. They will come all the way out, but you want to leave them just started like that. That way you don't have to have an extra hand. You can just pop them right back in. When we go to put our receiver on here, we want to keep the port door closed. If the port door is open, then it's going to hang up on the edge here when you try to drop the upper onto it. Make sure that you do not have your charging handle in because we need that room for the top. So make sure your charging handle is out of the receiver when you do this. Now we're just going to lightly set the upper receiver down on the fin, and you'll notice that it's sticking up a little bit. It doesn't just slide on there. So you just want to tap it down just a little bit, and then we're going to start the front pin. It really doesn't matter which pin you start. You just want to get it in there and get a bite. Make sure you get it all the way through. It's a little snug on this setup. You want to make sure you get it all the way through. That way it's engaging both sides of your block. If it's just engaging one side, you may break a chunk out of your block. And this is one place that, as long as you can look through and see that it's lined up, if you're really having trouble getting it through, you can get that hammer and just give it a little bit of a tap to get it in there. We're not talking about going crazy and really banging on it. Just a little bit of a tap will get it in there. Now once you've got that front one started, you can push down gently on the back and raise up on the front. Now you notice our port door open. That's quite all right. Push that down, and then that back pin should slide right through. And now you're nice and secure. We can feel on the back side that both pins are all the way through, so they're securely holding our receiver. Now the reason that port door popped open is when the fin went up in here, there's no relief cut in it for the door to close, so there's no way to close that door back up. We just didn't want it hanging up right here, which it can do if you leave it open when you lever that receiver down. So now we're good to go. We can step back and we can insert our barrel wrench and get it clocked correctly. Now you're going to be careful inserting it because we don't want to scratch the front face of the receiver, and we want to get our lugs engaged just like that. Now since we've got, this is the portion that our torque wrench is going to engage, I would prefer to have that facing up. That way we can get the torque wrench straight off of it. Now you'll notice, those of you guys that have used torque wrenches in the past, that there's an offset here. Normally you would account for the offset with the torque setting on your wrench. Do not do this in this case. Mega has already taken that into account, setting your torque wrench at 65 inch-pounds and applying it with this extra arm added on the wrench equates to 75 foot-pounds of force applied to the nut. So read the instructions, do what they say. 65 foot-pounds on the wrench translates to 75 at the nut. Now we're going to go ahead and put our wrench on here, and we want to make sure it's lined up as straight as can be with the extension. We don't want it cocked at an angle or another. And then we'll go ahead and apply some torque here. And I'm not applying any pressure here. I'm just supporting the end of this because we've got such a long arm here. So I'm not applying any pressure one way or the other. And there we go. We clicked it. We know we're at our setting. Now what we need to do is we need to back this off and then retorque it one more time. Now, some of you guys will go ahead and just kick the ratchet in the other direction and back it off. I don't like to do that on my torque wrenches, so we're going to grab a breaker bar and we're going to back it off, and then we're going to torque it again. Now the reason for the two-step torque is basically we're getting everything set, we're mashing down any burrs, we're removing any coating, we're getting those mating surfaces squeezed together really nicely, and a little bit of abrasion one way and then the other helps clean them up and helps them seat a little bit better. So you always want to at least do one step. When I'm doing standard AR-15 uppers, I'll usually do it 3 times. Sometimes you have to do it a little bit more than that to get the gas hole to line up in that barrel nut on an AR-15. That's not the case here, so we're just following Mega Arms recommendations on how to tighten that nut down. Now we have our upper receiver tightened together. Now we have to go ahead and install our gas system. Now that we've got our barrel installed in our upper receiver, it's time to assemble our gas system. Now on a normal AR-15, I would more than likely install the gas block first, then thread the gas tube through the upper receiver into the gas block and pin it in place. Unfortunately, since we don't have access to the area above the barrel or the area that the gas block seats into, we have to assemble the gas block and gas tube outside of the system and then slide them into place as one piece. Now, it's a fairly simple process. When you get your gas block, more than likely it will have a roll pin already installed. So the first thing we need to do is tap that roll pin out. Now what I'm checking for is you don't actually need to knock it all the way out. In fact, you'll save yourself a little bit of time if you don't. If you just knock it out enough that you can insert your gas tube into it, and we have to go a little bit further here, then you won't have to go to the trouble of trying to realign that pin. Oh, and we went ahead and knocked it all the way out. It happens. So we can line that up here and just start it back in. And we're just going to start that pin back in there. Again, check to make sure it doesn't actually protrude into the hole where you're going to put your gas tube. Now the gas tube slides in there nice and easy, but we're going to do something here first before we do that. We're going to take some Loctite and we're going to see how far in the tube goes. I'll mark it with my nail, and we're going to go just behind the gas port, and we're going to put some Loctite on there. Now before I do that, I want to make sure that I explain to you the orientation on this tube. You can see where the hole is for the gas to enter the tube, and you can see the end is capped off. And we also have a hole that goes all the way through that is for the roll pin to go across. You need to look at the orientation, the shape of the tube, and where that hole is located at. Different tubes from different manufacturers may have slightly different shapes. This one's got a bend up here at the beginning. Standard rifle tubes a lot of times have the bend back at the end to follow the contours of the chamber. But it really doesn't matter where the bend is as long as it's not contacting your barrel. But you have to make sure you take note of where that hole is. So we're going to go ahead and drop some Loctite behind the hole here. And we're going to insert it into the block, and we're going to roll that around so that Loctite gets nice and covered around the seal, and that will help reduce some of that nasty carbon that comes out of the back of there. We're just basically trying to seal the gas system up a little bit better to reduce any leakage and make things more consistent. That's the name of the game of accuracy in a semi-automatic precision rifle, is increasing the consistency. Now we've got that lined up. I just simply stuck the punch through the other side to get the gas tube lined up in the correct orientation. And then we're going to go ahead and start tapping that pin through. And there we go. We've got our gas tube installed. Now that we have our gas tube installed on our gas block, we want to go ahead and back the screws out so that they don't protrude through the channel here. And then we're just going to simply thread the gas block down through the upper. And we'll probably need to pull off the cap over the threads here. And what we're trying to do is thread the needle in this section here and pass the gas tube through the gas tube hole in the receiver while lining the block up. And there I felt it pass through, and then we're just simply going to slide that gas block back through there, and you'll probably need to use some kind of tool to push it back and make sure you get it on there. Now, you can see there's not a whole lot that we can do with the gas block right now. That's why we measured everything and made sure everything worked outside of the rifle. Now that we've got it in here, all we can do is access the screws through the bottom of the rail system. There are two slots here. The rearmost slot is cut out for carbine length systems, and since ours is a mid-length, then the gas block holes line up with the front slot. This is one of the reasons why you want to use a set screw type gas block if at all possible. If you use a clamp type gas block, you may have clearance issues, and you also may have trouble getting to the screws through the side of the rail system. So Mega Arms has a list on their website of approved gas blocks for this, or they have a list in the instruction sheet of approved gas blocks for this upper. Okay, here we are with our 3/32 Allen wrench, and we're going to get it down in here. And one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to back off the front screw considerably so that there's no drag at all. And I'm going to back off, I'm actually going to totally remove the rear screw. I'm going to make sure I turn over the receiver so it falls out. And I'm going to try to sight down through here, and you may need to get some external light source and try to make sure that we get the gas block lined up with that divot in the bottom of the barrel. Now that I'm fairly certain that that is lined up, I'm going to go ahead and reinsert my set screw here. And we're going to go ahead and snug it down. Now this is where the really nice thing about having that mark on the shoulder and on the gas block as well, because I can look through there and I can see that everything's lined up. It's also nice that the gas block hole is a larger diameter than the port in the barrel. That way if they're off just a little bit one way or the other, you're still good to go. Now as I tighten this down, I can kind of wiggle it a little bit side to side, and I can feel when it drops down into that divot in the bottom of the barrel and locks in. So we're going to tighten that down, and once we've got that set up and we check and make sure everything is lined up with our mark, we're going to go ahead and sight down the front and say, okay, that looks like it's lined up and it's not touching the rail anywhere, because if your gas block is canted one side or the other and touching the rail, besides having just straight functional issues, you may have some issues with messing up the free float and the barrel not being fully free floated, and that's not a good thing. So we're going to go ahead and make sure that's lined up, and then we are going to tighten our screws down. You may use Loctite on these if you wish. In fact, I would recommend it, but we're going to hold off until after we test fire it, and then we'll back everything off and we'll Loctite it in place. So we've got that snugged down now. And we are almost there. We're going to go ahead and we're going to break right here, and in the next installment, we're going to come back and we're going to put our Surefire muzzle brake on, and we're going to show you how to go through that. So that is our MATEN build up to this point. Actually, at this point, the rifle could be assembled and fired if you want. You just want to make sure that you're careful about those threads. You want something to protect the threads. So we're going to hold off until after we get the Surefire brake installed, and we'll talk to you about that here shortly. If you've liked this video, please make sure you give us a thumbs up. If you've got any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section below or send them to us on Facebook or Twitter. If you're a subscriber, thank you very much. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, and it helps us out. It lets our numbers go up and shows manufacturers that you guys like what we're doing. So if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. And until next time, get out and shoot!